Доброго дня, шановні колеги. Перепрошуємо за чергові технічні накладки. Сьогодні я знову буду сидіти з вами без відео. Єдина надія, що в мене не відключатиметься канал. Нагадую, мене звати Марія Дмитрієва. Я представляю громадську організацію «Центр розвиток демократії». І наш сьогоднішній захід – це третій і завершальний захід нашої квітневої серії експертних дискусій, які були організовані спільно з Міністерством соціальної політики та за участі ООН «Жінки в Україні», за участі Громадської ради в міжфракційному об'єднанні «Рівні можливості» Верховної Ради України і за абсолютно бездоганної організаційної та всесторонньої підтримки з боку Вищої школи публічного управління Національного агентства України з питань державної служби. Мета цих наших зустрічей – це допомогти підготувати робочу групу, яка розроблятиме нашу наступну державну програму протидії торгівлі людьми, до врахування нових викликів у сфері, власне, протидії торгівлі людьми. Нагадаю, що перший захід у нас був присвячений темі сурогатного материнства. Другий захід наш був присвячений проблемі порнографії і тому, як вона живить і проституцію, і торгівлю людьми. І сьогодні у нас найважливіший заключний захід. Ми розбиратимемо питання проституції і попиту на проституцію як головного чинного фактора зростання торгівлі людьми з метою сексуальної експлуатації. Окремо хочу подякувати нашим міжнародним партнерам, Європейській мережі мігранток, коаліції за скасування проституції КАП – це Франція, ВОПАЙ, міжнародній платформі за права жінок, окремо подякувати ООН «Жінки». І я думаю, ми можемо на цьому етапі переходити, власне, до вітань, а тоді я нагадаю вам, яка у нас на сьогодні програма, і ми рушимо за нашим розкладом. Пані Юлія Гончар, яка представляє ООН «Жінки», чи ви можете вимикнутися?
Вітання усім. Ради бачити вас, як завжди, раді підтримати експертні зустрічі, які допомагають нам захистити права жінок і дівчат і почути їхній голос. І я дуже хочу подякувати за високий фаховий рівень експерток, які провідну роль зайняли в організації цих експертних зустрічей, зокрема пані Марії Дмитрієвій, національній консультанті ООН «Жінки» Елі Ламах. Хочу подякувати нашим партнерам, Міністерству соціальної політики, Вищій школі публічного управління НАЦ, а також всім тим, хто знайшов час, можливість долучитися до цієї надзвичайно важливої теми. І я зичу нам сьогодні такої ж плідної зустрічі, як і попередньо. І я впевнена, що наступна програма, яка буде розроблена, яка почалася з такої високої залученості різного рівня фахівців і фахівчинь, безперечно, повинна бути високоефективною, і ми готові надалі підтримувати ці зусилля. Щиро всім дякую, всім плідної дискусії.
Дякую, пані Юлія. Хочу нагадати, що за можливості можете написати в чаті, як вас звати, яку установу ви представляєте і яку область, для того, щоб ми бачили охоплення нашого заходу по країні. Зараз я хочу запросити до слова пані Оксану Пустову, державну експертку з протидії торгівлі людьми, домашньому насильству і гендерної рівності Міністерства соціальної політики України. Пані Оксано.
Вітаю всіх учасників сьогоднішнього заходу. Рада бачити, що з кожним заходом долучається все більше і більше людей. І то показує те, що ця проблематика, ця тематика дуже для всіх цікава. І будемо, значить, і в подальшому планувати проведення таких заходів. Хотіла би нагадати, що ці заходи проводяться в рамках реалізації діючої програми протидії торгівлі людьми, яка вже завершується в кінці року, і також в рамках розроблення нової державної програми протидії людьми, яку ми плануємо розробити на період до 30-го року. Завтра ми вже будемо проводити першу сесію стратегічного планування, де будемо робити аналіз діючої програми. І тому, як ми вже говорили, що чекаємо від вас бачення проблематики, своїх пропозицій до наповнення нової державної програми. тому що ми це все будемо закладати саме в нову державну програму. Завтра ми проаналізуємо стан виконання поточної програми і вже будемо збирати напрацювання і пропозиції до нової державної програми. Тому, будь ласка, чекаємо від вас, активно долучайтеся, тому що 12 червня буде проведена наступна сесія стратегічного планування. На неї будуть запрошені не лише центральні органи виконавчої влади, а і адміністрації обласні. Можливо, і районні, не знаю, як у нас технічно це ми зможемо зробити. Ось. І буде ще одна сесія остаточна, де ми вже будемо обговорювати проект державної програми. Тому прошу вас, дуже долучайтеся, для нас дуже цінна ваша інформація. Тому бажаю всім плідної роботи. Дякую.
Дякую, пані Оксано. Пані Валентина, літовська з Вищої школи публічного управління, коли вона підключиться, вона нагадає нам, яка процедура для тих із вас, хто хоче отримати сертифікат про проходження цього навчання протягом цих 3 зустрічей. А я хотіла нагадати, що ми, Центр розвиток демократії, спільно із Вищою школою публічного управління запрошуємо вас надсилати на Вищу школу ваші питання, пропозиції і думки, і навчання на які теми з питань, зокрема, захисту прав жінок, досвід яких країн, стосовно яких конкретно проблем ви б хотіли дізнатися детальніше, і ми... я сподіваюся, зможемо організувати для вас такі відповідні вже або вужчі, або ширші заходи. Я тоді зараз швиденько нагадаю вам, хто у нас сьогодні в програмі. Першою у нас виступатиме Гема Сібі, виконавча директорка коаліції за скасування проституції з Франції. Ми з цією організацією співпрацюємо з 2018 року. Ми проводили не один захід разом із ними. І вона розповість про досвід Франції у боротьбі з торгівлею жінками і проституцією, і про те, як вони прийняли відповідно закон на цю тему. Вона про це розкаже детальніше. Після неї ми послухаємо Олександру Новікову з Європейської мережі мігранток. Вона коротко ознайомить нас із тим, з чим зіштовхуються українські мігрантки в Європі за останні роки, зокрема після початку повномасштабного вторгнення. Після неї ми запросимо до слова пані Тетяну Руденко, старшу керівницю проєктів з Офісу спеціального представника та координатора ОБСЄ з протидії торгівлі людьми. Вона розкаже про протидію попиту з точки зору зобов'язань ОБСЄ в цій сфері і які позитивні практики країн-учасниць вже напрацьовані. Після неї ми послухаємо Вівіан Тейтельбаум, сенаторку Сенату Бельгії, президентку Європейського центру Міжнародної ради жінок. Вона розкаже нам детальніше, як між собою пов'язані торгівля людьми та проституція. Після неї ми дізнаємося про досвід Ізраїлю.
How they are really connected. After that, we will listen to Israel experience by Dina Dominitz, National Anti-Trafficking Coordinator from the Ministry of Justice, Israel. After that, we will listen to Germany by Ingeborg Kraus, psychotherapist who works with this topic for several years, maybe several dozens of years. And the last speaker will be Yulia Dorokhova, who is the head of the charity organization All Ukrainian League Legalize Ukraine. She will tell us the grassroots situation, what are women dealing now with in Ukraine, and what are the prospects. And then we will finalize our meeting, but our common work with this topic will not be over, hopefully. Hema, may I invite you to the microphone?
Yes, thank you very much. Hello, everyone. Thank you to Democracy Development Center for the invitation. And thank you all for being here. It's such a pleasure to see that many people connected on this webinar. My name is Hema Sibi. I'm the Executive Director of CAP International, the Coalition for the Abolition of Prostitution. The Coalition for the Abolition of Prostitution gathers 37 grassroots and survivor-led organizations from 29 countries, all of them providing support to 19,000 persons in prostitution and victims of trafficking for sexual exploitation worldwide. What happens in the system of prostitution and why we fight for it is because all of our members on the grassroots level realize a few truths about this system. First, prostitution is a form of violence. Survivors testify again and again that the repetition of sexual acts that are not desired, but that are socioeconomically, physically or psychologically coerced is in and of itself a violence. And around this core violence orbits the others, the rapes, the threats, the physical assaults at the hands of buyers of sexual acts and pimps. The second lesson that we can learn from our field members is that prostitution everywhere in the world systemically targets women and girls from the most discriminated communities. We're speaking about Indigenous women and girls in Canada, for example, migrant women and girls in Europe, refugee women and girls, poor, those that are from ethnic minorities. They are the prime targets of pimps and of buyers of sexual acts. The overrepresentation of women and girls from the most discriminated groups in prostitution is not an accident. It is because it's the product of intersectional oppressions such as patriarchy, racism, colonialism, war, class domination. The prostitution system is driven because of one core root. It is the male demand for the purchase of sexual acts. And so when we speak about combating trafficking for sexual exploitation, we must name the destination of this crime, which is prostitution. Women and girls are trafficked for the purpose of prostitution. And only when we acknowledge that the legislation on prostitution has an impact on trafficking for sexual exploitation, will we be able to fight this violence more efficiently. The demand is the men that want to buy sexual acts. It is this demand that fuels trafficking. CAP International supports the abolitionist model, also called the equality model or the Nordic model, and it's a human rights-based approach that recognizes prostitution as a form of violence and that grants victims protection. The abolitionist model is based on 5 core pillars, and it's a very efficient legislation to fight trafficking for sexual exploitation and to uphold the protection of victims. The first pillar of this legislation is to decriminalize all persons in prostitution. The second pillar is to provide exit pathways to the victims and social support. The third is to target the demand. We will never end the system of prostitution nor sexual exploitation if we don't tackle the root of this system, so prohibiting the purchase of sexual acts. The fourth pillar is the prohibition of all forms of pimping, including brothel owning. And the fifth one is to raise awareness in the general society on the non-commodification of women and girls, on the fact that sex can never be purchased. The abolitionist model is deeply rooted in international human rights law, and I would like to remind a few conventions that highlight that it's the way forward. The 1949 UN Convention clearly states that prostitution is incompatible with human dignity. The CEDAW Convention requests all states to suppress the trafficking of women and girls. The Palermo Protocol calls on all states to adopt all measures aimed at discouraging the demand. In 2023, the European Parliament adopted a milestone resolution calling on all states to criminalize the purchase of sexual acts, to decriminalize persons in prostitution, and to criminalize all forms of pimping. It reaffirmed that it supported the abolition of prostitution. And one milestone that again arose last year is the UN Special Rapporteur on Violence Against Women, who in her report on prostitution calls prostitution a serious and aggravated form of violence against women, urging states to adopt the abolitionist model. Today, we have the evidence. We know what works. There are three major legal models around the world on prostitution. The first one is the prohibitionist model. It's a model that penalizes persons in prostitution, buyers of sexual acts, and pimps, putting them all at the same level. This model has largely proved its inefficiency. It increases the marginalization and the stigmatization of women in prostitution. It treats them as criminals and puts them on the same level as perpetrators. It has really failed where implemented. The second model is the regulatory model on prostitution, also called full decriminalization. This model considers that prostitution is a job like any other and will decriminalize persons in prostitution, considering them as workers, but it will also decriminalize pimps and buyers of sexual acts. When you decriminalize pimping, pimping explodes. And in countries that have adopted this legislation, such as Germany or the Netherlands, we can see the catastrophic results in terms of human rights for women and girls in prostitution. In Germany, for example, the demand for purchase of sex has exploded. Human trafficking has sharply rose. Women are sold on an industrial scale, and you will hear all about it with expert Ingeborg Cross on this panel today. But finally, we also have a legislation that works. This legislation is the abolitionist model, or the equality model. It has been adopted by 9 countries in the world, including Sweden, Norway, Iceland, France, Ireland, Northern Ireland, Israel, Canada, and recently the state of Maine in the United States of America. The results of the abolitionist model that recognizes prostitution as a form of violence, provides a victim status to the victims, decriminalizes them, and targets the demand are clear. In Sweden, which was the pioneer country adopting this legislation, 10 years after prohibiting the purchase of sexual acts, we have witnessed that prostitution was divided by 2. So the prostitution system started to shrink. Sweden is now considered a dead market for prostitution networks that have moved away from the country. In France, we have adopted the abolitionist model in 2016. Since we have adopted this legislation, we can observe some very positive results on the field. The recent assessment shows that more than 2,000 persons benefited from an exit program, giving them access to a residence permit, an accommodation, a monthly financial allowance to exit prostitution, psychosocial support, and vocational training. The objective of these exit programs is to provide concrete alternatives to victims on prostitution. 90% of those that completed those exit programs and were supported by our members found stable jobs at the end. So they completely transformed their lives. 45% obtained a residence permit, 71% learned the French language and now master it. So 2,000 persons that benefited from an exit program is not a lot, but it's still 2,000 persons whose life has radically changed from violence to a more stable, comfortable life. In 2024, thanks to our abolitionist legislation, 65 organized pimping networks were dismantled in the country. It is a very high number compared to other European countries. And 14 million euros have been confiscated from pimps to be reinvested in the protection of victims. Buyers in France are exposed to a fine that can go up to 1,500 euros, and they can also attend a mandatory awareness-raising course on prostitution. What we have seen is that since we adopted this legislation, more than 10,000 men have been arrested for purchasing sexual acts. Among those that attended the awareness-raising course, 60% said that they would not reoffend. When we look at the profiles of who are the people that buy sex in France, 100% of those that were arrested, so 100% of those 10,000 persons were men. More than 60% were married, and more than 60% had a child, at least one child. This really shows that buyers of sexual acts are not, following the stereotypes that we have on them, that they are in some sort of celibacy and looking for a company. Those are men that are looking to dominate another person through money. So the abolitionist model works. It shrinks the prostitution market, tackles the demand, dismantles criminal networks, and provides support to survivors. In 2024, the European Court of Human Rights acknowledged that the abolitionist model was a coherent global approach that protected victims. Today, it is more urgent than ever to adopt this legislation everywhere to fight sexual exploitation, especially in the Ukrainian context. War and displacement fuel the commodification of women and girls, fuel prostitution. In Ukraine, we know, and we have reports of pimps waiting at the borders for Ukrainian refugee women to exploit them. We've seen that since the war in Ukraine has started, a 600% increase in searches that associate the words Ukrainian, porn, and escorts. That's a report from the OSCE, and I'm sure you will hear about it through the expert Tatiana Rudenko. The number of Ukrainian women and girls in Berlin's legal brothels has increased 5 times since the beginning of the war. And we know that armed force kidnap and exploit women in prostitution, using them as sexual objects to gratify soldiers. We must protect women and girls from being commodified, bought and sold in the prostitution system at all costs. And to achieve this, the abolitionist model is the way forward. Thank you very much.
Дякую, Хемо, за надзвичайно цікаву
Thank you,
розповідь.
Hema, for your very interesting story. Hopefully, we will meet again with you, and hopefully, many people will learn again how specifically French organizations managed to lobby this law that was introduced in the Swedish model in France, and what benefits this brings not only to women who are in prostitution and have exit ramp, but the state in general. How is it beneficial for the government? Thank you very much. And we transit now to Ms. Alexandra Novikova. She represents the European Network of Migrants, and she will tell us about what Ukrainian migrants come across in Europe, as continuation of what Hema was telling us. Hello. It's the third time I represent the European Network of Migrants. This is an international platform that brings together 50 organizations in 3 countries of Europe. I wanted to talk about the migrant women, starting with the full-scale invasion. A lot of women and girls left Ukraine, and Europe was one of their favorite destinations. I agree with a lot of things said by Hema, and I want to emphasize that migrant women are probably the most vulnerable, or one of the most vulnerable categories, because migrant women face absence of legal status, language barriers, discrimination, And of course, economic dependency and lack of financial resources. As Hema said, pimps, traffickers, they hunt Ukrainian women in Europe. And we all remember the stories where pimps were just waiting for women on the border, proposing to give them a place to spend the night or transport them somewhere. A lot of cases like this. A big problem is that migrants do not call police for help because they're afraid that their documents can be taken, that temporary protection can be withdrawn. And it's a big problem because in many cases, the victims are blamed, the women are blamed, but real culprits are not blamed. The buyers and the traffickers are not blamed. Our network acknowledges that migrants as victims of systematic inequality, not as sex workers. And we are for the system that protects the rights of victims, not criminalize them. And we support the main ideas that Hema just laid out. Main thing that we need to secure access to legal access to the victims of trafficking, regardless of their legal status, to guarantee them non-criminalization, non-deportation, because they are exploited. And of course, shelters and crisis centers are very important to organize, where women could receive help, including help with finding a place to live, legal help, medical help, emergency medical help, and psychological help. It's very important to create vocational training, language courses, to create a space where women can develop and prepare them for living independently. Because most often women become victims of prostitution because they are in very hard situation. And because of lack of the knowledge of the language, they cannot find a job. Of course, we need to protect the laws that punish the buyers, that punish the people who rape women, not the women themselves. This is all. Thank you for your attention. I think other reporters are more competent in telling you how it works in other countries, how it works in laws. From myself, the last thing I wanted to say, I myself am a migrant for 13 years. I now live in Greece. And I can tell you that all my friends, all women I know, every woman received a proposal to get a job, but it was in fact just a masked trafficking offer. It was traffickers sending advertisement, sending nice description, offering high salaries like 5,000 euro per week. And if you see this, you know it's about sexual exploitation. Thank you very much. Thank you, Alexandra. And we are thankful to European Network of Migrants for participation in these events. Now I want to give floor to Ms. Tetiana Rudenko, who represents the Senior Project Officer of OSCE Office for combating trafficking of human beings. She helped us to organize this event and provided her expert support too. And she will tell us about the commitments of OSCE in counteracting demand in sexual exploitation and prostitution, about the positive practices in Europe too. Please, Tetiana, your floor. Thank you very much, Maria. And dear colleagues, it's very nice to be participating in these events for the third time. And it's very important that these events are focused on discussing the issues that are hard to solve, that are very hard to solve not just for Ukraine, but for all OSCE participants. We have 57 countries in OSCE, and each country has its own approaches to these issues, including hitting demand. Before in-depth analysis what demand hitting looks like in various countries, let's maybe, it's maybe a bit of heretical thought. We can treat prostitution differently, but one thing is clear from the international documents. Whatever is approach of states, approach to prostitution, but they need to take measures, legislative, educational, social sphere, hitting the demand that produces exploitation of people, including women and girls, because this exploitation is against human rights. This is Palermo Protocol, which supplements the Convention of UN on transnational organized crime. So, a question was asked by many governments. Help us define what are the better practices, how the states are supposed to plan and implement these measures to counteract demand. Before talking about the measures to hit it, let's discuss what is a demand. It's a market law. The demand produces supply. So this is law, works for trafficking too. We have consumers, mainly men, who want to buy sexual services. This encourages the pimps to get income from this desire. So the pimps want to sell the sexual services, and this produce, they want to get more income, and this increases trafficking. What makes the trafficking different for people trafficking for sexual exploitation as opposed to labor exploitation is that a person that uses the services of the victim contacts them directly. And this is important difference because it also relates to the harm incurred. The buyer, the John, whatever you call him, they directly harm the victim of trafficking. And this identifies what tools we can use to prevent this crime. Looking at Ukraine, the colleagues already mentioned that starting from the start of full-scale invasion, already in February, in March of 2022, there was a huge increase of online search of Ukrainian women, Ukrainian girls, Ukrainian women for relations, etc. What concerns us very much, you see the statistics of the rest of the events on the slide. What is very concerning that in April and in summer of 2022, the terminology changed for such searches. It was talking about Ukrainian women refugees. They were searching for sexual services. They wanted to receive the sexual services from women who are very vulnerable, as they understood, the refugees. And as a consequence, a growth of demand produced increase of supply, and the markets of prostitution reported growth of the interest of prostitution for Ukrainian women of 250%. This is supply. We knew this. This is momentary statistics from summer last year. You see the locations in red that have the most an announcement about those sexual services, where the providers are marked as Ukrainians. If we check other locations, there will be others, and we see that the majority is women and the majority are young women. The large graph that you see in the middle shows exponential growth. It started small and then huge peaks that show huge growth of such proposals. So where demand goes, the supply also follows. What our research says, what are we talking about with our participating countries? First conclusion is that demand is hit in an insufficient level and quite fragmented, this response. In spite of clear commitments that countries made to hit the demand, 14 OSCE participants didn't take any measures at all against it. Where there are measures, they are very non-uniform. They are all very concentrated, let's say. About the preventative measures, the prevention is very conservative in countries. Mainly, they do campaigns of raising of awareness. And these campaigns are very general, very generalized. They don't go for a target group. They go to the public in general. And what is done for everyone, we know it hardly works on anyone. Criminalization is a very weak point. Positive example of France is good, but unfortunately, not many countries do it like that. Some states have more opportunities, have more capacities. So the countries, the governments are not really straining themselves to do, to follow the commitments. About the effective measures for criminal justice, a lot of discussions are about. A lot of buyers don't know that they are dealing with the victims of trafficking. So, getting read about the charters about use under knowledge. So it means basically only if someone who is using sexual services knows that this is a victim of trafficking, only then they can be criminalized. In fact, it doesn't work, as our colleagues mentioned, because we will check profiles of the buyers of sexual services, but no buyer is interested in learning. Are they dealing with a victim or someone who is voluntarily in prostitution? So this point simply doesn't work, and no one will acknowledge that they had prior knowledge that they are using the vulnerable person. Statutes of strict responsibility that criminalizes buying without any additional conditions. They better follow the sphere of action of the Palermo Protocol and better prevent the crimes. But they also are effective only if enforced, which means that police should be enforcing the law. It shouldn't simply exist. The example of Ireland, I'll give you. This is very fresh research, fresh recommendations that were developed in Ireland. They were published in the beginning of April or end of March. And in these two columns, you see the profiles of women in Ireland and profiles of buyers in Ireland. So, key points, 10 to 15 points percent of prostitution in Ireland fall under classic definition of trafficking victims. Only 5 to 10 started going to prostitution on their own wish and with conditions when they have had other choices. About 80% are vulnerable categories of women, mainly migrants. They don't consider themselves sex workers. They don't want to identify as such. They're just forced to do it to earn money for their basic needs. And they don't want to have sex with unknown men several times per day. So if we are talking about absence of real concern, this is exploitation. As to buyers, they are men, they are Irish, they are married or have girlfriends, have education and have good income. They just want to satisfy their sexual need, and they neglect basically their wishes and the situation of the women. The criminal gangs organize these services to be accessible all around the country. And the renters also make a lot of money to rent out the room for bordello. So we have the whole business around this vulnerable women who sell themselves. And in 2017, there was adopted a law that it is forbidden to buy sexual access to the body of other human, especially a human who is in vulnerable situation. This is real quotes of the buyer of sex services. And then about the special report of UN that Hema already mentioned. It shows that the buyers of sexual services don't want to know if the victims are forced or voluntarily. It doesn't matter to them. The holistic approach doesn't touch only criminalization. This approach needs cooperation of many sectors, including education, public awareness work with legislators, work with medics, work with technology companies, etc. And the last thesis about prevention. What I was mentioning, a lot of countries do public awareness campaigns. That's their main investment into prevention. But when we asked the governments, it turned out 55% of the campaigns are organized by NGOs. So it's not quite the states. And mainly they are not focused, they are not targeted, they are just general, without focusing. We need to focus on the groups that are most responsible. Like in the USA, truckers against trafficking, they have this movement, and they use truckers to inform what harm buying sex causes. So we can do targeted campaigns like this. About educational programs, the same Irish research showed that most buyers buy sexual services before the age of 25. So they acquired this habit when young. So we need to train young boys and men about harmful masculinity. About codex, you saw the statistics in Ireland that most men are well off. They receive salary more than average. And the same data is for the state of Washington in the US. 80% of buyers had jobs when arrested, and most of them had high-paying jobs. These men don't want to lose jobs, and that's why if a corporation bans buying sexual acts, can be a very powerful guardrail. Online guardrails, targeted advertisement, many examples like child.safe.ai. They use bait to show that advertisement that can prevent the demand. Then the number of clients who refuse the service grew by 57%. And the last one is online platform. Online platforms do know what happens to people in the internet, but they do hardly anything to prevent it. 87% of children who became victims of trafficking found it in the internet. So better governmental oversight is needed for controlling online platforms. Thank you. I'm ready to answer your questions if you have any. Thank you, Tatiana. Thank you again for your participation, for your expert support. Questions will be in the end so that everyone has an opportunity to ask them. And at the last meeting, we had Taina Betime, who was telling about American legislation based on which providers and owners of websites are responsible if their resources are used to recruit for sexual exploitation. And now I invite to the floor Ms. Viviane Titelbaum, Senator in Belgian Senate, President of the European Center of the International Council of Women, who will tell us about the link of trafficking and prostitution.
Hello, everyone. Good afternoon, and thank you, Maria, for inviting me to this very interesting and important panel. The European Council of International Council of Women has 28 member organizations, and we have about 20 in Europe, and then we also have candidate countries like Ukraine, like Turkey, but we also have countries in the Mediterranean region like Morocco, Turkey, Israel, and Tunisia. So what I wanted to do today is to address the critical gap in our fight against human trafficking, a missing link that has been persisting for too long. It's the link between trafficking and prostitution. And I think that understanding this connection is essential if we are serious about ending exploitation, not just managing it. And unfortunately, Belgium is a perfect example. I will come to that, from Europe down to Belgium. So the truth is simple and too often avoided. Demand for paid sexual access fuels both prostitution and trafficking. Yet the legal frameworks that govern Europe's response to trafficking have largely failed to tackle this reality. If we look at the EU Anti-Trafficking Directive of 2011, we see that it rightly identifies trafficking for sexual exploitation as a key crime. But it stops short of addressing prostitution as the structure that drives this exploitation. It calls for reducing demand, but it leaves member states free to ignore prostitution itself. And the gap is clear. Trafficking and prostitution are two faces of the same industry. Ignoring prostitution means abandoning trafficked women and girls to continued exploitation. So, just a few words about the EU Trafficking Directive, who was a major step forward. However, as I said, it stops short of addressing the structural cause behind trafficking for sexual purposes. The prostitution market itself. So, Article 18 of this EU Anti-Trafficking Directive gestures toward reducing demand, but lacks the courage to confront the prostitution system that sustains trafficking. So, by imposing only narrow obligation to penalize those who knowingly use traffic victims, it leaves a vast gray zone where exploitation thrives. Belgium's recent law exemplifies this failure. It legitimizes prostitution without dismantling the structure that feeds trafficking networks. So when we legalize the market, but we ignore the exploitation underneath, we are not protecting rights. We are protecting demand. And so every day we delay real action. We abandon thousands of women and girls to lives of coercion dressed up as consent. How many more will it take before we admit that regulation without protection is in fact complicity? Furthermore, it creates a very dangerous loophole. Member states can comply with the directive without ever questioning the legitimacy of prostitution as an institution. Trafficking is isolated as a crime of what we can call, or what they call, bad actors, instead of being seen as the predictable consequence of a legalized or tolerated market for the sexual use of human beings. In other words, the directive criminalizes the symptoms, which is trafficking, but leaves untouched the disease, which is the system of prostitution. So without confronting prostitution as this systemic driver of demand, the directive is addressing only the supply chain, never the market that creates the need for supply in the first place. So the new Belgian law on prostitution, is it dangerous? Yes. Does it have dangerous consequences? Yes. While Belgium's 2022 reform decriminalized prostitution to better protect what they call sex workers' rights, it fails to adequately address the link between prostitution and human trafficking. Research and field evidence show that trafficking for sexual exploitation remains deeply intertwined with the prostitution sector. Yet, the new law treats prostitution mainly through a labor rights lens, without strong parallel measures to prevent and detect trafficking. So the missing link is normalizing exploitative systems and overlooks the hidden coercion many victims experience. Without stronger anti-trafficking safeguards, including robust inspections, victim identification mechanisms, accountability for third parties, Belgium is facilitating trafficking under the appearance of legality. So Belgium enacted further legislation as of December 1st, 2024. Sex workers can sign employment contracts. Pimps become acknowledged entrepreneurs. What the law did effectively is decriminalize pimping and what they call sex work as a legitimate job like any other. So what changed? In June 2022, Belgium took on the model of New Zealand and fully decriminalized sex work. But even before 2022, mind you, the law did not punish prostitution. The penal code used criminalizing pimping and all forms of exploitation of the prostitution of others. So now prostitution is no longer a criminal act. Advertising of sexual services has been legalized. Employment contracts for sex workers were introduced, giving access to social security, maternity leave, and pensions. But let us really focus on the fact that prior to this law, prostituted people were already able to enjoy self-employment status, and thus their respective social rights, such as maternity leave, pension, working capacity, allowance, family allowances. And social security cover is not offered to employees or to the self-employed, which would be the case either or. But they are entitled to it, but they have to pay for it. And that means more work, more passes. So it's not as transparent as it looks like. Third parties, such as brothel owners, web platform managers, are not legal actors so long as they do not engage in exploitative practices. So at first glance, these reforms seems like a triumph for rights and dignity, but the law does not define exploitation clearly enough. It repealed the old anti-pimping articles, as I said, but without putting in place a strict regulatory system. There is no licensing for brothels, no mandatory inspections, and no regular monitoring of so-called facilitators. So the conditions of this so-called job are so unacceptable that the contract is riddled with exemptions. A person could, in theory, refuse a client or stop the activity, but in reality, the brothel logic, where the client is king, rules, of course, and displeasing a client means displeasing the boss. And for many vulnerable women, it will be dangerous and sometimes, as we all know, fatal to risk it. If during the questions I can come to specific examples of that. But in fact, the Belgian law has had to explicitly provide for the installation of emergency buttons, a grim acknowledgement that labor rights are no protection when the violence is structural. So in reality, pimps can now simply rebrand themselves as managers or employers operating legally unless victims can prove coercion or abuse, an almost impossible task for the most vulnerable. So in Belgium, we know the truth. Studies consistently show that around 90% of prostituted people are estimated to be foreigners, and about 80% of women in prostitution are victims of trafficking or extreme exploitation. Women, mostly migrants, often fleeing violence or poverty, are trapped in systems where they did not freely choose. So Belgian police and NGOs on the ground confirm it. Exploitation did not disappear. It simply changed face. So trafficking today wears a business suit. It operates websites, it issues contracts. Chains are no longer visible, but they are just as real. So this is the blind spot in the Belgian law. It treats prostitution as labor without acknowledging that trafficking and prostitution are deeply connected systems. It separates what in reality cannot be separated, and by decriminalizing the sector without robust anti-trafficking safeguards, that allows trafficking to flourish within a legalized market. So without confronting this link, Belgium is not fighting trafficking, it is facilitating its invisibility. As a conclusion, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, laws matter, and when they are poorly designed, they worsen injustice. Belgium's reforms claim to defend what they call sex workers, but it risks abandoning the most vulnerable to organized exploitation. We must not be fooled by the language of empowerment when the structures of oppression remain intact. We must call on lawmakers, on civil society, on citizens to demand new approach, one that names trafficking for what it is, punishes those who profit from it, and truly offers exit routes, protection, and dignity to all women and girls. All recent European data confirm that sexual exploitation remains the primary purpose for trafficking. The structural vulnerabilities that drive prostitution, poverty, migration, coercion have not disappeared. So it's reasonable to conclude that the vast majority of prostituted individuals in Belgium today remain trapped in systems of exploitation now increasingly concealed by legal reforms. Legislation must not, it cannot turn a blind eye to exploitation. If we are serious about protecting human dignity, we must recognize that legal reforms without strong anti-trafficking safeguards risk legitimizing systems of coercion. It is our responsibility to act to ensure that prostitution is not a cover for trafficking and that vulnerable lives are not sacrificed under the illusion of freedom. In Belgium, 9 grassroots organizations, under the impulsion of one that's called Isala, have requested the Belgian Constitutional Court to repeal the law. It's a necessary step to reopen the debate. The missing link is demand. The missing strategy is abolition. The missing courage cannot be us. Let's fight for a Europe where no woman or girl's body is for sale. Prostitution is not a choice. It's what's left behind when all other choices are taken away, said Rachel Moran, a survivor of prostitution and author of Paid For. Let's choose abolition. Let's choose the equality model. Let's choose equality. Let's choose for a Europe where no woman is bought, sold, or forgotten. Thank you.
Дякую дуже, Vivian.
Thank you, Vivian, for such a detailed and well-informed speech of yours. And I wanted to remind you about the document that was mentioned by Vivian and Hema, Palermo Protocol. It directly says that consent of a person to be sold does not absolve a buyer or seller from responsibility, and this norm should be applied to prostitution in compliance with other international documents like General Declaration of Human Rights and CEDAW. Thank you, Vivian. From the high school, there was a hand. You wanted to tell about the written assignment for the certificate, right? Or will you do it later?
About what?
No, that was about the written assignment to those who want to get the certificate for participating in these events.
No, thank you.
No, that's not for you. It's okay. It's okay. Thank you, Vivian.
It's for the participants of the event. Some of them receive governmental certificates about the... And now we'll get into Dina Dominitz, who is the National Anti-Trafficking Coordinator in the Ministry of Justice of Israel. And she will tell us what was approach of Israel to reduce demand. Please, your floor.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. It's a great honor for me to be presenting and highlighting Israel's actions in this field. will try and share my presentation. Can you all see it?
Yes, we can.
Okay, perfect. So, okay, so I'm very glad that Vivian was speaking before me. Thank you to my team, my technical team here to help me. I'm very glad that Vivian spoke before I did, because this is the approach that we have taken in Israel, is that in order to combat trafficking, and we all know that the 3 Ps from the Palermo Convention, prosecution, protection, and prevention, part of prevention is reducing demand, is attacking the demand. This is a way that we can prevent trafficking from happening. And when we're talking about sex trafficking, and then we have to tackle the demand for prostitution in order to combat trafficking in persons. So this was my first slide. I just want to give a very brief overview of the rights that victims of trafficking receive in Israel. We have various, very broad array of rights, both in the criminal proceedings, compensation, rehabilitation and therapy. There are work visas, year of rehabilitation, witness visas, and voluntary and aided safe return. We see this all as very important to the process. And this is just to give you an idea of the countries, the source countries which have, the victims from these countries have been identified in Israel from 2021 to 2024. As you can see, these are for all forms of trafficking, not just for sex trafficking. You can see that from Ukraine, we've had 50 victims that have been identified in the past 4 years. Russia 59, but also, for example, from Ethiopia, 56. And as you can see, nearly all the areas on the globe seem to arrive in Israel at some point, and they are then exploited there and recognized and awarded the various rights that we have been giving. When we came to discuss tackling the demand for prostitution as a preventative measure for combating trafficking, basically we decided on a combined approach. This is what we call a combined approach, which means that on the one hand, we have enforcement, but side by side to enforcement, we have the aid and the rehabilitation for persons in the cycle of prostitution. And this is the aim, that the above aim, which captures this approach, establishing a prohibition on prostitution, consumption of prostitution as part of an integrated approach that includes public education and awareness, as well as the extension of treatment and rehabilitation methods. And one is just as important as the other. This is how we see it. We cannot have just enforcement on its own. So this is our overall approach. Under the enforcement, under the legislation, we have a fine similar to the French model. Today it is around $550. And if there is a second offense within a certain period of time, then it is double the fine. But we also have a rehabilitative workshop, which is not mandatory, but it is an alternative that the offenders can choose. Instead of paying the fine, they can choose to go to this workshop, which is run by the parole agency, by the Ministry of Welfare and Social Affairs. And it's a very serious workshop. There are 3 sessions with a social worker. I'm actually the first person that the consumers meet at this workshop. And I come to explain about the legislation and about the reasons behind the law, and encourage them that they chose this option, even if it was only to get out of paying the fine. It still is a big commitment, and we have seen from our research that it indeed has had a good effect. And most people who have been through this workshop do not continue to consume prostitution, also similar to what Emma has described in France. So this is one of the branches, the enforcement. The other branch of the rehabilitation basically was set up in a government resolution at the same time that the legislation passed in 2019, and it established an interministerial team that I have been very privileged to still head for the past 5 years. And this team is formed of all the government ministries. We will see it detailed shortly in the presentation. Every year we have a budget of 30 million shekels, which is around 10 million, $10 million. And we have to build a work plan of every year of which programs, exit programs, but not only exit programs, also campaigns, awareness raising, education, and many other innovative programs. I will try and give a spotlight on a few of them today. And all this integrated approach, as we call it, has been followed by a research and evaluation study. I will also give you some of its results today. Okay, so this is the formation of the interministerial team. As you can see, we have Ministry of Health, the police is on the team, the Ministry for Social Equality, Ministry of Welfare. I won't read out the whole list, but as you can see, there are very many governmental bodies that sit on this team. I, as the National Anti-Trafficking Coordinator, head this team. And together, as we said, with the budget that we have annually, build programs and set out working plans. And there is a big advantage that I can also tell you about, that when you have all the government organs sitting together on a team and thinking together, and they all know each other's programs, then you always see that there are new ideas and collaborations and cooperation that is born from just sitting there and hearing about that. And then the police, for example, will say, oh, let's do a training together for our police officers together with the social workers, for example, on this team, so they know how to refer victims of prostitution when they encounter them in enforcement settings, for example. So I'll just give a few examples because I think there are a few very exciting and really, I think, groundbreaking models that we have adopted. For example, the insolvency model, what we call here, you can see it on the right. The idea is that we have found that one of the main barriers which is posed before women who wish to exit, or I say women, but of course it's also men and transgenders who wish to exit the cycle of prostitution, is the fact that they have debt and they are insolvent, and therefore this, even though they wish to exit, they feel that they have no choice but to continue to work in prostitution because they have to pay back their debts. So they have to continue working in prostitution, and the prostitution, life in prostitution itself also creates debts, because in order to survive life in prostitution, you either develop a dependency on alcohol or on drugs, which of course is a very expensive dependency, or you you spend tons of money on shopping for yourself or anything that you can do just in order to endure this life. And then many of the pimps we have also seen, and the traffickers, use this as a method to capture women, is they offer them all kinds of diamonds, very expensive clothes, shoes, drinks on the house, and then at some point they discover, this is in the beginning, and then once they have received all these so-called gifts, then they suddenly discover that it's actually not a gift, they need to pay it off, and then they're already in the cycle, and they have to continue working in prostitution in order to pay off their debt. So the insolvency model is basically aimed exactly at this barrier, and what the insolvency department within the Ministry of Justice has done is that they basically have trained their lawyers and also the social workers together, and they have identified cases in which the insolvency was caused because of prostitution, and then they offer each woman a special fast track in which they can help her to exit this insolvency with the court. And it's a very special adapted model, fast track, that is also quicker than the usual insolvency model, but also gives them the support and gives them the help that they need, helping even with the bureaucracy, with the simple, filling out the forms, going to court, helping them find proper occupation so that they can pay back their debts more easily, and also even teaching them how to live financially in a better way, how not to live from just, I have a client, so I'll have money today to buy myself a sandwich, or how to plan ahead, how your work, and then you'll have a salary once a month, or the first of the month, whatever. All these which sounds very simple to maybe lots of us, is not a simple thing for a person who has been in prostitution for a long time. So I think that's a very interesting model. We also have the legal aid department in the Ministry of Justice who also assist with all the court proceedings involved. Another project that I think is very interesting is the Housing First project. This is together with a philanthropic foundation that we had matching, and basically the idea is that if a person in prostitution doesn't have a roof over her head and doesn't have the stability of knowing where she's going to sleep tonight, it could be also with her child. Several of the people, of the persons in the program have children. Then there's no chance that we'll be able to reach any other steps, for example, such as the insolvency issue. First, they need to have a house. They need to have somewhere to live, somewhere that they can call theirs and that it's their home. So basically what the program does is that and it has its own financial model. Basically, it's supposed to also bring in money at the end. Gradually, the person who received the house, the apartment, will pay more and more as she goes along. It's for 5 years. In the first year, they don't have to pay anything. It's funded by allocations from the state, from national insurance of the state. But then from the second year, she has to pay a certain amount. And at the end, the 5th year, they pay a substantial amount in order to fund themselves. But the whole program is accompanied by social workers and by experts. They sign a contract. They're given a lot of dignity and respect. They're a house owner. They have to obey the rule. Basically, there are a few conditions, but none of the conditions means that they have to exit prostitution in order to enter this program. They can be in prostitution. It's okay that they're in prostitution, but not in their home. But it's not from a place of paternalism of the state. It's from a place that we say your home is your safe place. This is the place where you can feel safe. You don't want to bring clients. You don't want to bring prostitution into your home. Keep that as your safe place in order to have. That's yours. And so far, we have had 46 apartments, so such apartments that each woman has received. We also have 5 men who have received an apartment, many who were in prostitution. And it only started a few months ago, but we already can see that the direction seems like it could be a very good direction. Also, there was a lot of research done before to see that that in other countries that have adopted this model, we saw that there is a lot of success, and hopefully we see this as growing and expanding to further apartments and. So that's that project. We also have holistic centers for counseling, where we have many agencies who sit there. Each one offers their own services, so we don't have to send a person in prostitution. Oh, you need to go to the Ministry of Health for this, and then you need to go to the Ministry of Finance for help with the bank. There's one center. It gives you holistic counseling, and basically it tells you what are your rights and helps you to fulfill them in all the different government agencies that exist. Okay, so this is just, I want to show you a bit of data from the research that we have had for these 5 years, because this model that we have been speaking about is a temporary order. What the first legislation that passed in 2019 was a temporary order for 5 years. And now we are at the point where we have basically submitted new legislation, a bill of legislation to the Knesset, to the parliament. And I will describe the difference. And of course, it is based on the findings of what we saw in the research. So for example, in this graph, we can see that during how many fines were given by the police throughout these 4 years. So we can see that there are certain times where there was a peak, but mostly the level of fines is not high. In this graph, we can see that when the number of fines was high, then actually we can see that the demand for prostitution decreased. So this was a special research done called Google Trends. They checked how many persons tried to Google search for prostitution by certain keywords, and that were also done together with the NGOs. And then they saw that in certain times throughout these 4 years, there was a decrease in the search. That means that less people were looking to consume prostitution. And this happened to coincide, I think quite interestingly, with when the fines were, when there were more fines given, when the enforcement was higher, then the demand was lower, which means that there is an effect for enforcement. Basically, it has an effect on the demand. When the public sees that the police is serious and they're enforcing the law, they tend to lower the demand. So I think that's an interesting find. And one of also, I think, the main results of this research, and I think it's really the heart of the research, that what it comes to show us is that we can see that there was a very big raise in the public support of the law. 72% of the public, and these were very big polls that were done within the research, 72% support this law. They support criminalizing clients of prostitution. Before we started the law in 2019, this temporary order, there were only 36%. of the
Ну, я
public.
не звоню.
They were in
Ну, я
it's-
говорю, так а как может быть контроль, если там, ну, я говорю, если, например, поширение информации?
someone is on. Okay. At the same time that we can see that there was this dramatic raise in support of the law, we can see that only 5% of the public actually believe that the law will have an effect in reality. Only 5% believe that the law will actually reduce the consumption, but they still support it. And also only 13% of professionals who are helping and who are in the field believe that the law will actually reduce the phenomenon. So we can see that the public support is very strong, even though they don't believe that it will actually have an effect. And this is interesting to me, and I think it's an interesting point. I think that basically what it comes to show is that the public, at least in Israel, has realized that this is the right thing to do. And they support this step, even though they don't really think that it will actually have an effect. But they support it because they think that it's morally the right thing to do, and they understand that persons in prostitution are not there out of choice. They're there mostly because of their circumstances of their lives, as Vivian and the previous speakers have described very nicely today as well. And we know that it's really not a question of choice. And this is something that I think we've managed to educate the public about, and they believe in it. So that's an interesting point. We can see that the actual consumption, we've had fluctuations, but generally there was even a slight increase of the consumption of prostitution. But it's also related to the fact that the enforcement was very low. The enforcement was not high. So that's an interesting thing. But I think basically, as I said before, we learned a lot from the polls that were done on the public opinion in all different groups in society. For example, we can see quotes from the research. A person said, "I didn't know there was such a law. Who knew it was forbidden at all?" This is a 32-year-old prostitution consumer who participated in the alternative workshop. He said, "Only after the policewoman said it's something new from 2020, he said, oh, good to know, who knew about it at all." And a woman who is active in prostitution said, "I do see a slightly different attitude in society. I do see the strengthening of organizations. I do see legitimacy in bringing things to the table. If in the past the conversation was in the shadows, today it's okay to talk about it at a family dinner, about the topic of prostitution." This is on the right-hand side. You can see an example of a campaign, a public campaign that the Ministry of Justice did when the law began. Now we are working on a new campaign, which will be hopefully wider spread and better funded. A few more quotes just to show you. A person formerly in prostitution said, "It sparked a lot of public discussion, which also made me think about it for a moment, to hear testimonies from women, all sorts of things that somehow seeped into me." Another person said, "I want to convey the message to continue working prostitution and no law can stop us." So we can see that there were different opinions, and that's okay. We don't criminalize persons in prostitution. They can continue working in prostitution. That is not considered a criminal. We see them as victims, and we still help them. Persons in prostitution and persons who are exiting prostitution, they do not have to take that on. So there was a big public debate. There still is a very big public debate, but still we can see a shift. I think that we can see, and also in these quotes, we can see that, as this person says, a director of a therapeutic program says in July 23, "I think that today those who are in prostitution know that there are options, even if she doesn't reach out, even if it's still hard for her, and obviously it will take her a long time, and even if she doesn't know everything, she already knows that there are options. She knows that it's not hidden, it's something known, it's something that you can talk about." And another person also, for example, says, "I was in the place that don't interfere in my life, don't tell me what's good for me, it's patronizing, I don't need that, stop belittling my work, until I realized that asking for help doesn't belittle my work, relying on people is okay." So we do see these encouraging signs, and this led us to the new bill, which, as you can see from the press, from the media, the Minister of Justice has also accepted our opinion and has submitted a new bill of law to the Knesset, which is now finalizing, and it would make this a permanent bill of law, not just a temporary order as it was up till today. And this is now just past the first step of the legislation, and we will hopefully in the next few months we will complete this legislation, and this will replace the temporary order and become a permanent order in Israel. So we're hopeful. There's still a lot of work to be done on both accounts, both on the enforcement, but also on the side of the aid and the programs for the persons in prostitution. But we're hopeful and we're optimistic because we can see also how far we've come, and we believe we see that also the public stands behind us and believe in this is the right way to go. So I'll just end with this quote that I thought was interesting of Golda Meir, who was the Israeli president. She said, "I thought that the Jewish state would be free of these evils afflicting other societies, theft, murder, prostitution, but now we have them all." And that's a thing that cuts to the heart. So I think we can all identify with this, and we also understand that we have an international commitment as well, not just every country to its own. We also have a way of helping each other. And I will also always offer, as Israel, we're always happy to, to share our experiences, to share our best practices. And if any other countries, such as Ukraine, are interested in cooperating, we are only too happy to do so. And of course, with our international partners, such as the OSCE. Thank you.
Дякую, Діно, за таку детальну
Thank you,
розповідь.
Dina, for this very detailed story. We have just half an hour and we have 2 more reports. For this reason, the only thing I remind that when in Sweden in 1999 the law was adopted, less than 1/3 of population supported this law. Now in 2020, one more public opinion survey was done, and now the law that criminalizes the buying of sex is supported by more than 75% of population. Now I want to invite Ms. Ingeborg Kraus, psychotherapist from Germany, who works with this topic for several years. She's a psychotherapist of trauma and supervisor. She's the founder of the network Trauma and Prostitution, and this network provides medical and therapeutic help, support to women who survive prostitution. And in the last 2.5 years, she does supervision for Ukrainian therapists, psychotherapists who work with those who suffered from sexual violence related to conflict. Please, Ingeborg, your floor.
So, thank you for inviting me. It's a real honor to be here. And I'm really impressed of the democratic level of this event. Yeah. So I fight for more than 20 years for the introduction of the Nordic model. And I was invited by some politicians, but in Germany it's very difficult. So yes, they let themselves advice from 20 years and even now from the profiteers of prostitution, not from the expert. And I can tell you today they're expert talking, and this is really good. You start on a really good step here in Ukraine. So I have prepared a speech for today, no longer than 15 minutes, to tell you what's going on in Germany. So we have 2 completely different laws on prostitution that were introduced in Europe more than 20 years ago. The Nordic model in Sweden and the legalization model in Germany. We know the results. No country needs to experiment anymore. With the legalization model, Germany has become the brothel of Europe, and it has turned our country into an El Dorado for human traffickers, pimps, brothel owners, and sex buyers. If you choose the German model, you will increase violence against women in prostitution, but also in society as a whole. You will normalize prostitution, increase prostitution, and turn your country into a magnet and breeding ground for sex buyers. We have a law against human trafficking, but it gets useless with a law that legalizes prostitution. Listen to our experience. Far from protecting women, The German model has become hell on earth for them. Sexual exploitation has been industrialized overnight. Mega brothels with a capacity of up to 1,000 sex buyers have sprung up, offering flat rate brothels. For 70 euros, you could get a beer, a sausage, and unlimited women. Even after the legal reform in 2017 that banned flat rate brothels, things haven't improved. Prostitution has increased by up to 30% since. The profit from this business amounts to 15 billion euros per year, and this calculation dates back to 2003. 30 years ago, it was estimated that 1.2 million men bought sex every day in Germany. As prostitution has been normalized and sex buyers have been completely decriminalized, demand has exploded. A recent study on sex buyers found that 1 in 4 men in Germany is a sex buyer. But I wonder if there aren't more, given that 93% of German men watch porn. Many studies on sex buyers have shown that they are aware of the women's situation. But a law that guarantees them impunity separates them from their capacity for empathy. This is also reflected in the 2021 OSCE report on trafficking in human beings for the purpose of sexual exploitation. The driving force behind this form of trafficking is money. The fuel is the demand. Therefore, the OSCE strongly encourages its participating states to shape the prostitution law to reduce demand. Since 2017, we have included in the law the punishment of sex buyers who knowingly exploit a trafficked person. We had only 1 conviction so far, so it's a useless law. The sex buying must be banned completely. The composition of women in prostitution has changed since the legalization. Today, around 95% of prostituted women come from the poorest regions of Europe. These women have special vulnerabilities. They often are alone, they don't speak the language, don't know their rights, they are young and poor, may be in debt, or are pre-traumatized. In the Palermo Protocol from 2011, which serves as a guideline for all European countries in the fight against human trafficking, also defines human trafficking as follows: scam, fraud, abuse of power, or exploitation of special vulnerability. Physical violence is not necessary to commit human trafficking. Abuse of power can occur when a person feels forced to accept their own exploitation. In a context where prostitution is viewed as a job like any other, these particular vulnerabilities are not taken into account and are even considered as qualifications for entering prostitution. With this law, we not only turn a blind eye to the crimes listed in the Palermo Protocol, we even see prostitution as a solution to these particular vulnerabilities. Women in prostitution told me that they were often told that they should be happy to be working here in Germany. Prostitution is seen as an option against poverty. Almost on the same day the war broke out in Ukraine in February 22, many sex buyers commented on online platforms that they were looking forward to Ukrainian women now fleeing to Germany. When many Ukrainian women arrived in Germany by train, human traffickers were already waiting for them at the train stations. This led many to be drawn into prostitution. When this became apparent, some aid organizations developed flyers to the arrivals to warn them. Here is one of them, and I was involved in the production of this flyer. For 2.5 years, I have been working as a supervisor for Ukrainian therapists. The sessions take place every 2 weeks and are simultaneously translated. These therapists do an outstanding job under very difficult conditions. Although they themselves suffer from the war, they tirelessly help others. I have heard and supervised hundreds of cases and got an insight into the distress of Ukrainian women. As in every war, women's bodies become a battlefield. Rape is the weapon used for this purpose. Ukrainian women experience sexual violence in this war in different ways. Their distress caused by the war is sexually abused by exploiters and sex buyers, also from the West. Due to financial insecurity, some turn to pornography with OnlyFans or prostitution. We have counseling centers for prostituted women in every major city, but they mainly help women to endure better prostitution. They even offer introductory counseling for prostitution or brothel tours. Some official counseling centers even offered sex work as an option to Ukrainian war refugees in April 22. This is a quote from the website of one of them in Berlin. It is very common for people to do sex work in times of need and financial insecurity. Fleeing war is one of those. Sex work is a way to make money anonymously, without work permit, without education, without speaking German or English. I reported this to the police in Berlin, and the response was, "This is a state-funded institution and sex work is legal in Germany." Today, 3 years after the outbreak of war, every second woman in prostitution in Berlin is a Ukrainian war refugee. When I found out, I wrote a letter to the Parliamentary Committee for Women, quoting this. This letter was even signed by over 100 Ukrainian therapists. The response from the left-wing parties was, "We make a distinction between voluntary prostitution and human trafficking." So even for war refugees, they see prostitution as a voluntary decision. And how looks the fight against human trafficking in Germany? This law hasn't helped combat human trafficking at all. Every year, less and less victims are identified, not because there are fewer victims, but because the police has little power to identify them and to intervene. They say that this law is pro-trafficker and leaves women defenseless. It's an illusion to believe that a bright field keeps human trafficking in check. The largest underground sector is located in legal brothels. Just one example. For years, brothel owner Jürgen Rudloff advertised for clean prostitution without human trafficking and exploitation. After years of undercover investigations, women finally came forward. They reported feeling trapped in a never-ending hell. Humiliation and violence were part of everyday life and were willingly tolerated by the brothel keepers. Curiously, his brothel never closed, even after Rudloff's conviction. Why? Because the local economy was involved in it. A closure would have put many local businesses in financial distress. This example shows how deeply the German industry is now entangled in the sexual exploitation of women, and now increasingly of Ukrainian women. Today, over 90% of women in prostitution in Germany are victims of human trafficking. We have at least 100,000 women in Germany who are victims of human trafficking. 1,000 times more than are identified by the police. The German government tolerates a situation in which most victims are never identified and will never receive justice. That is why we are rightly called the brothel of Europe. This is well known in Europe, and Germany has been called upon internationally for years to take action against it. Worldwide, warnings and admonitions against Germany are mounting, without Germany responding. Even now, the new government still does not consider the Nordic model as an option. Scientific evidence has proven countless times regardless of the country, the form of prostitution, or how it is practiced. Prostitution is highly traumatizing. The incidence of developing a PTSD in prostitution is more than twice as high as for war victims. Finally, I would like to present a case study. My client came to Germany as a young woman. She comes from a Jewish academic family from Ukraine. Her entry into prostitution was through the lover boy method of a German human trafficker at a time in her life when she was very vulnerable. She was only supposed to stay for 2 weeks. She remained in prostitution for 10 years and was financially totally exploited by him and the brothel keepers. She exited 9 years ago prostitution and still suffers from severe traumatic stress disorder. My client's survivor survived the Holocaust. She, the only granddaughter of this Holocaust survivor, sought a better life in Germany and experienced sexual exploitation in legal German brothels. The question of guilt is also repeatedly addressed in therapy. She feels guilty for not having said no. But what repeated guilt does Germany bear in this family history? I would like to end my speech with her words. Prostitution is the opposite of freedom. It's not voluntary. If you choose this path because you are in need, it's not voluntary. There's nothing voluntary about it. It's a last chance. It's rape every time. Thank you.
Дякую, Інгіборг.
Thank you, Ingeborg. This is a very sad story in reality. And too many people in Ukraine think that Germany is a positive example, and this is something we need to copy. They often drool over huge incomes from prostitution in Germany, but they never mention the huge price that women from various countries, from Northern Africa, from Ukraine, from Europe, from Germany, that suffer in these brothels. We expect Yulia Dorokhova to connect to us, head of the All-Ukrainian League Legal Life in Ukraine. Hopefully she will be here in time, and hopefully she will tell about the on-the-field experience of women in Ukraine. While we are connecting, question to Ms. Ingeborg: is there any body or agency in Germany that is responsible for the work of the state in the sphere of sexual services? Is there such body in Germany?
I don't understand. What do you mean with body?
Agency, ministry?
Я перекладу. So does Germany have an institution that oversees provision of sexual services?
Governmental institution.
Well, you know, we have, since 2017, we introduced some regulations in the law. So every prostituted woman has to register now, which is also an insult for the women, because you get a passport that you are, you know, a sex worker, and it remembers us, you know, what happened during the Nazi time, because it was the same. But only 10% registered. So how many years? There are 8 years have passed and only 10% registered, because nobody wants to have a passport to be a prostituted woman. So also this completely failed. You know, they wanted, you know, to have a view, an overview of it, but it doesn't work. So only 10% registered, about 33,000 women registered, and we think that we have 300,000 or 400,000 women in prostitution. So it stays in the underground, but as I said, also the bright field is not free of trafficking.
Мгм. Дякую. Дякую за відповідь, Інгеборг.
Thank you, Ingeborg, for your answer.
Я так бачу, що пані Юлія пише, що вона не може.
As far as I see, Ms. Dorokhova cannot connect. She has technical problems. Maybe later we will make a separate meeting with Yulia and maybe other women who work with women who suffered from trafficking or prostitution in Ukraine to learn in more detail what is happening in Ukraine in this sphere and what problems arise to these women. What are the prospects in this sphere? Our organization did participate in the development of the draft law that would introduce Nordic model in Ukraine. And hopefully in the nearest years, we will be able to lobby this issue to adopt this law. We have only 10 minutes left. If anyone has questions right now, I will not be able to read the chat, I'm sorry, because too many questions are there. Raise your hand and I will give you a floor and you will ask a question.
Так, поки ви вирішуєте, чи ви хочете ще задавати питання.
While you are trying to think about the question, I will voice some comments from the chat. Olena Zaitseva says, it's an interesting research from France about how the prostitution affects the budget. It brings more harm and loss to the budget than it brings incomes.
Так, тут ще. Так, не бачу я інших питань.
I don't see questions, I'm sorry. Dear colleagues, if anyone has a question right now, raise your hand and ask your question.
Можна голосом, можна не в чаті.
You may use your voice, not necessarily do it in chat.
Чи може хтось з наших доповідачок має ще якісь коментарі, які ми би хотіли поділитися перш ніж
I want maybe any comments you wanted to share before we finish.
Стосовно завдань, там пані Валентина
About the assignments, about the feedback. Valentina did send you the
публічного управління. Вона
from public administration.
отримати сертифікат.
Those of you who wants to receive a certificate on participation of these events must participate in all 3 events. And the records, we will send records of these events next week. Here from Valentina. Valentina, maybe you can say about this in voice. Yes, hello. I will now voice my message that I sent to the chat. For those participants who want to be certified for this count as training officially, prepare a description of your proposals based on what you heard and proposals how to resolve the problems that we have. A list of measures, implementers and co-implementers. So within tomorrow, please send these proposals to me. I will give you the email. Could you send it to our personal messages? You give us only tomorrow, just one day? Well, the assignment was given in the very beginning of the events, so it was supposed to be this. Oh, we see Miss Dorohova. Miss Dorohova, you have just 10 minutes. And it's good, because it was very hard to log in today. Yes, hello to everyone. Can you hear me or no? Yes, we can. Yes, we can, Yulia. Please speak. Because I cannot see anything and I'm not sure. So, I will not be obstructing and wasting your time. I just want to say the main thing. I'm the director of the organization of people who, and this is the oldest organization dealing with this in Ukraine. In 2017, we were going to the president of the cabinet of ministers and raising the issue of this problem that was never raised in public. That in Ukraine there are more 100,000 people in prostitution who had this experience. And generally the state doesn't do anything in this direction. And most of these people in prostitution are women. That's why I don't understand how can they ignore us? Because we are the community for which this program is implemented. So I am very concerned why in this time where so many women are in prostitution and very many women do go into prostitution just to survive and to put food on the table for their children. We need a state program for exiting prostitution. Why don't they pay attention to this? We are very concerned about this, and we want to point out that for us, we just don't understand how, during the war, they try to legalize prostitution and legalize pornography. It should not be allowed. So I think it's necessary to add to the program of the next years that you are developing, to include the exit program for prostitution. We have great experience of France and other European countries where the state takes care about women and gives them a chance to free themselves from pimps and other people who have power and who force them into prostitution and to give them opportunity to survive. This is a very important issue. And one more issue, a research is needed, or survey, to clarify how many women are engaged in prostitution right now in Ukraine. Just to understand how many women we are talking about. In addition, a big thing is change of legislation, change of the administrative code 181 Part 1 of Administrative Code of Ukraine, based on which women are being fined for prostitution. And in reality, we have large research that shows that this article works as a mechanism of engaging into prostitution. We know many cases where women get into prostitution specifically when they are forced to do this by the police. So governmental enforcement structures. It's a fact. We have a research that this Article 4, it works just for the crime. It just facilitates the crime, not prevents it. And we have a draft law that we want to bring to the parliament and to change this administrative code article to free women from this hook and to give them exit ramp and not to be punished, for the women not to be punished and the buyers are to be punished. Whoever who is engaging women in prostitution. This is the short message from me to you. Thank you. Thank you, Yulia. Yes, who is saying anything?
А хтось щось почав говорити чи почала? Це було питання чи що?
Вибачте, можна питання?
May I ask a question? Please do.
Там теж задавали таке питання, що якщо ми вибираємо, треба вибрати одну тему і
So when we are writing this feedback, should we choose one topic or should all three topics be touched upon?
Я думаю, що пані Валентина зараз пояснить, якщо що. Але
Valentina can explain it right now, but as far as I understand it, if you see in the sphere that you work at least one topic that we discussed mentioned what is closest to your competence, what is happening. Valentina, what can you say about this? Yes, I see several questions to specifically the feedback. Maybe not all participants will be able to cover all three topics. Then probably write about one or two that are closest to your position, where you can give a good feedback. And also, I wrote in the chat comments, we extended the term until the 5th of May. Valentina, if several people were sitting here, can they write just one report, and how will they share the certificate? I need to clarify this issue, you know, I cannot answer it right now. And I will tell you. Valentina, then once you find out, write a letter to our mailing list with a referral to the materials. Also, colleagues, I remind you, if you want additional meetings on specific topics related to women's rights, about the experience of specific countries, in cooperation with the Higher School of Public Administration and Center of Democracy Development Organization, can organize it for you. So write what is interesting for you, ask us, and we will try to organize these events for you. Then all these details will be written in the letter. If you don't work in a position that relates to your work, how do I receive certificate? It is hard to answer, but I think to some extent it touches everyone. I am from Oblast. So what should I write? But there are situations from real life that a girl was transported to Dubai. Can I write it and propose measures against it?
ДСНС, Державна служба з надзвичайних
Ні, я знаю.
No, DSNS, yeah, for State Service for Extraordinary Situations. Can I write about sexual harassment or... Yes, of course. That's the only things that we come at our service. We are rescue service. I think if needed, we will continue the discussion as letters. And now I want to thank everyone, our excellent expert, Julia, Ingeborg, Inna, Vivian, and Ms. Rudenko and Alexandra, and Herma too. Everyone who found time to share the experience. May I ask a question? We have many questions, in fact. The problem is we are out of time. We are over time right now. I propose to continue it in writing. I will give my address to Valentina and she will attach it. And if you have questions to me, Maria Dmitrieva, I will answer them gladly. Okay, thank you, our reporters. I want to thank you, our partners. School of Public Administration. I want to thank UN Women. I want to thank Ella Lamach, the expert of UN Women for the Ministry of Social Policy. The Ministry for Social Policy for initiating this great cycle of meetings. And our interpreter, Dmitro Lysok, who was working for us in all three events. And hopefully we will meet you later and try to resolve the specific issues. And now, for now, thank you very much and goodbye. Thank you, goodbye.
Дякую, до побачення.
Дякую,
До
до
побачення.
побачення.
До побачення.
Побачення.
До побачення.
До побачення.
До побачення.
Дякую, бережіть себе.
Дякуємо, до побачення.
Дякую, до побачення.
Дякую, до побачення. Дуже вражена доповіддю Юлії Дорофєєвої. Дякую.
Дякую, до побачення.
Дякую, до побачення.